The clock on my laptop read 11:47 p.m. when I finally looked up from the mess of quarterly reports spread across our kitchen table. The cursor blinked on a half-finished spreadsheet, like it was waiting for me to admit defeat. The house was quiet in that late-night way that makes every little sound feel bigger than it is. A refrigerator hum, the faint whir of the ceiling fan, the soft tick of the wall clock above the doorway. March 15th was ending. Technically, it already had. Midnight was minutes away. My 30th birthday was sliding into the past, and my wife hadn't said a word about it. Not an "I'm proud of you," not a happy birthday, not even a distracted smile with a quick, "Sorry, I've been slammed today." Nothing. I'm Miles Arden. I make a living as a tech consultant for small businesses around Columbus, Ohio. Nothing glamorous. I fix networks that shouldn't have been built the way they were, patch security holes no one knew they had, and teach owners why password 123 is not the hill they want their company to die on. It keeps bills paid and gives me the kind of work I can do from home most days. 3 years ago, I was a detective with Columbus PD. 5 years in a job that teaches you something no other job does. People lie like they breathe, and the truth rarely shows up on its own schedule. I didn't leave by choice. Budget cuts erased my unit, same as a lot of others. I told myself it was a new chapter. I learned to troubleshoot routers instead of interrogating suspects. Turns out the mindset transfers. You follow patterns, notice what doesn't add up, and you don't stop at the first easy answer. I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my eyes. All day, I've been buried in client work, hoping at some point Mira would drift into the room with a cake or a bottle of something, and that sheepish look people get when they pretend they almost forgot, but didn't. I didn't want fireworks. I didn't need a party. I just wanted the smallest sign that the day mattered to her because it mattered to me. At 7 that evening, she'd breeze through the kitchen like she always did when she was late and try not to show it. Designer heels tapping on tile, hair fixed into that smooth, glossy wave she somehow managed even on stressful days. She wore a navy dress that made her look like someone who belonged on the cover of a magazine about success. The kind of dress that costs more than my monthly car payment. I remember noticing the label when she first bought it, half joking about whether it came with a small vehicle attached. "Going out with the girls tonight," she said, checking her reflection in a microwave door like it was the final authority on whether she'd conquered the day. "Nadia's having relationship drama again. You know how it is." She said it casually, like news you mention on the way to grabbing your coat. No pause, no shift in tone. No quick glance toward me, as if something important was waiting to be acknowledged. I sat there with a spoon halfway to my mouth, trying to decide whether to remind her. The older version of me, back when I was sure I could fix anything with direct force, might have said something like, "Hey, before you go," and let the sentence hang. But I didn't. Something about the way she spoke felt too clean, too practiced, like she was stepping over a line she'd memorized. I'd learned to treat those moments carefully. Sometimes the questions you don't ask are the ones that give you the most information. So I watched. "Don't wait up," she called over her shoulder, already heading toward the garage. These things tend to run late. The garage door rumbled shut. Her car engine caught, then pulled away. The taillights disappeared down our street, like 2 red commas ending a sentence I wasn't part of. I stayed in my chair and stared at the empty doorway longer than I want to admit. 30 years old. And I felt like someone had placed a hand on my chest and quietly reminded me that time doesn't slow down to give you what you think you deserve. She forgot, I told myself. Except Mira didn't forget things. She set reminders for everything. Birthdays, anniversaries, the day we first met, the exact weekend her first promotion went through. Her phone buzzed constantly with calendar alerts. She ran her life like a project with milestones that could not be missed. If anything, I was the one who needed help remembering dates. She got a small kick out of it early in our marriage, teasing me in that gentle way that still made me feel looked after, not mocked. So why tonight? The thought wormed under my ribs, quiet but persistent. I tried to push it away, telling myself work had been brutal lately, that her firm was expanding, that she'd been juggling too much. But the feeling stayed. Something was wrong. I got up, rinsed my coffee mug, then wandered back to the table. The reports were still there, but I wasn't looking at numbers anymore. I was replaying the moment in the kitchen. Her face, her voice, her lack of hesitation. I opened my phone without fully deciding to. There are habits you pick up as a detective that never really leave. One of them is the instinct to verify before you reassure yourself. Another is the instinct to use what you already have access to. Mira and I had shared locations years ago. It started for boring reasons: traffic, safety, convenience. I'd never checked it with suspicion. It was the kind of thing you forget exists until you need it. The Find My app loaded. My own Blue that sat at home. Hers pulsed several miles away. Not in German Village, where Nadia lived. Not downtown at any of their usual dinner spots. Not a bar or a cafe I recognized by outline. It was at the Grand Meridian Hotel. I felt my throat tighten in a way that had nothing to do with air. The Grand Meridian was not a place you went by accident. It wasn't an oops, we ended up here. It was the kind of hotel people chose on purpose. There were only a few reasons anyone visited it at night. Big celebrations, serious business meetings, or things you didn't want happening under your own roof. I zoomed in, heard it didn't move. It sat there like a nail driven into wood, refusing to budge. Room detail popped up. Room 304. I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred a little, hoping the dot would slide across the map to somewhere that made sense. But it stayed still, quiet, and stubborn as a fact. I placed the phone face down on the table. I listened to the house again, to the hum and tick and fan whir, as if any of them could explain what I was seeing. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe she was meeting a client there. Maybe Nadia had decided to hold court in the hotel lounge because she liked the cocktails. Sure, maybe all of that was true, but my gut didn't believe any of it. There's a kind of silence that follows suspicion. The moment right after your brain connects dots you didn't want connected. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's just a slow internal settling, like the floor shifting under your feet, not enough to knock you down, but enough to remind you the room isn't stable anymore. Midnight came and went. March 16th arrived without celebration, and I was sitting in the kitchen, 30 years old, staring at a map that showed my wife in a hotel room she hadn't mentioned. Whatever this was, it wasn't nothing, and I knew, with the kind of certainty you don't get often in life, that the next move I made would decide everything that came after. I didn't sit around debating it. The moment I saw that blue dot on my phone pinned to the Grand Meridian Hotel, my body moved before my mind could soften the truth. I grabbed my keys, pulled on a jacket, and walked out into the cold March night. The neighborhood was asleep, the kind of quiet that makes your thoughts sound louder than they should. I drove downtown with the radio off, letting the silence press against me. On the way, I tried to build harmless explanations the way people do when they're scared. Maybe it's a client thing. Maybe Nadia wanted drinks somewhere fancy. Maybe the Find My app is wrong. But every excuse had the same problem. Mira had told me she was going to Nadia's. And whatever this was, she hadn't said a word about it. The Grand Meridian glowed ahead like a polished promise. Valets still working. People in expensive coats moving through the revolving door like the night belonged to them. I didn't go to the front. I slipped into the parking garage, the place smelling of damp concrete and engine heat. I'd worked security here years ago, back when I was still with Columbus PD. I knew where to park without being obvious. I knew how to watch without looking like I was watching. Then I saw her car. Mira's white BMW sat in spot B47, perfectly lined up, as if careful parking could cancel careless choices. My stomach tightened. The blue wasn't a glitch. She was here, and next to her BMW was a silver Maserati I recognized instantly. Not the car, the name. Victor Rains. Mira had been mentioning him for months. Venture capitalist, big talker, the guy who might fund her firm's expansion. Always work, always connections. Seeing his Maserati beside her BMW turned all those stories into something else. I sat there for a long minute, hands on the wheel, the old instincts kicking at the door in my head. Part of me wanted to storm upstairs and end it in one ugly scene. But I didn't come here to make noise. I came here to know. So I called the front desk. Grand Meridian, this is Lila. How may I help you? I kept my voice even. I'd like to send a birthday cake to room 304. It's a surprise for my wife. No hesitation. Just polite efficiency. I ordered a chocolate cake and told her what to write. Happy birthday, Mira. I hope you enjoyed tonight. I asked for delivery at midnight. Then I waited where I could see the entrance. At 12:15 a.m., I watched a hotel employee carry the cake into the elevator. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Mira, still with Nadia. Drama getting worse. Might be really late. Even now, she was lying. Calmly. Automatically. Like truth was just another thing she could edit. At 12:45, the elevator doors opened. Mira hurried out, hair slightly off, dress wrinkled, moving like someone who'd just been startled awake. She beelined for her BMW and climbed it fast. A couple minutes later, Victor Raines stepped out, tight-faced and alert, scanning the garage. He walked straight to his Maserati. They didn't speak. They split like people who knew they'd been seen. That was all I needed. I drove home before either of them left the garage. I wasn't chasing a car. I was chasing the full story, and now I had the first hard piece of it. At 1:30 a.m., Mira crept back into the house, slipping upstairs like silence could erase the night. I stayed at the kitchen table in the dark, my laptop open, the calm settling in the way it used to before a case turned serious. She thought she was safe inside her lie. She wasn't. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was pacing the floor or staring at the ceiling like a movie cliche. I just stayed awake in a different way. The way you do when your mind has crossed a line and can't unsee the other side. Mira came home at 1:30 a.m. as quietly as a person can when they're carrying a secret that heavy. I heard the garage door close, her heels on the stairs, the bedroom door shutting with that careful, almost respectful softness, like she was trying to be kind to the man she'd just deceived. I stayed downstairs. The kitchen lights stayed off. My laptop sat open on the table, and the quarterly reports in front of me looked like relics from another life. The old version of me, the detective who used to walk into chaos and demand answers immediately, kept whispering in my head, "Go up there. End this now." But I'd seen too many cases blow up because someone couldn't wait. Confronting without context gives liars room to shape the narrative. It turns you into a character in their story instead of the author of your own. So I did what I always do when something doesn't add up. I gathered information. Months ago, I'd installed network monitoring software on our home system. At the time, it was purely practical. We'd had drops in bandwidth, random outages during my client calls, and I needed to trace whether it was our provider or something inside the house. The tool logged active devices, connection times, and data spikes. I wasn't spying. It was a wrench left in a toolbox. But tools don't care why you use them. They just show you what's there. At 1:35 a.m., Mira's phone reconnected to our Wi-Fi. Nothing unusual about that. She'd been out. She came home. The phone rejoined the network. What was unusual was what happened next. Her data usage surged. Not a scrolling through social media surge. Not a watching clips before bed surge. It was a sharp, frantic spike, big requests, rapid bursts, the digital equivalent of someone tearing through a room looking for something to hide. I stared at the graph for a long minute. Deleting. That was my first thought. When people come home nervous and their phone starts moving data like that, they're not checking the weather. They're cleaning a trail. Messages, photos, call logs, whatever they think could surface later. My throat tightened, but my hands didn't shake. I trained for this kind of moment back when the stakes were street level. Different setting, same logic. I opened our shared cloud storage. We'd set it up when we got married, the way couples do when they're practical and optimistic. Family photos, tax files, house paperwork. Mira used it constantly because she liked having backups for everything. She never bothered learning the settings beyond sync on. I did the setup. I knew the quiet features she didn't care about. One of those features kept versions of deleted files and backed up messaging data for a fixed period before permanent removal. It wasn't magic. It wasn't even hidden. It was a default safety net. Mira didn't know it existed. I clicked through the account, found the folder where her phone backups lived, and opened the most recent archive. At first, I told myself I was just checking whether she was okay, whether she'd been somewhere dangerous, whether something had happened to her and she wasn't ready to talk about it. That story lasted about 30 seconds. The first thread I opened was with a contact saved under VR. The messages were long. Casual. Familiar. Too familiar. The kind of tone you don't develop after a single bad night. They rolled back through weeks, then months. And the deeper I scrolled, the colder the air in the kitchen seemed to get. This hadn't started recently. It went back till October, right around the time Mira's firm landed that consulting contract with Victor's investment group. I remembered her coming home excited, saying this could be the turning point for the company, that they finally had the kind of client that would put them on a bigger map. I remembered how proud I'd felt for her, how I'd cooked dinner to celebrate, how she'd kissed me and said we were building something together. The messages told a different story. What began as professional banter had shifted quickly into something private. Inside jokes, compliments that went past workplace politeness, plans that used the language of work but carried the heat of secrecy. Then hotel dates, repeat patterns. The Grand Meridian wasn't a first mistake. It was a routine. I leaned back, eyes stinging, not because I was crying, but because I'd been staring too long without blinking. Then I kept reading, because at that point, stopping would have been its own kind of lie. Around December, the tone changed. There was still what I didn't want to see: affection, late-night messages, the kind of intimacy that makes your stomach go hollow. But threaded through it was something uglier. They were talking about money. Not his money. Not her money. Mine. They referenced my grandmother's trust fund, like it was a shared resource they just hadn't unlocked yet. Victor asked questions about how it was structured, when distributions were available, whether Mira could guide me toward investing more aggressively. Mira replied with confidence that she could handle it. That I was careful but persuadable. That sooner or later I'd sign off on moving funds into the right portfolio. The right portfolio meaning they weren't just betraying me emotionally. They were planning to reach into my inheritance through me, smiling while they did it. Like my marriage wasn't a relationship, but a hallway to a safe they wanted cracked. I scrolled slowly, collecting screenshots, saving copies outside the cloud, labeling dates. The detective part of me had taken over without asking permission. If someone was building a case against me, I was going to build a better one against them. At one point, I caught my reflection in the dark laptop screen. Face lit bluish, eyes flat, jaw tight. I looked like I used to look in an interview room when a suspect thought they were smarter than the evidence. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself. Pain you can feel and survive. The worst part was realizing how long this had been happening while I sat across the table from her every morning, trusting a life she'd been splitting in half. The clock said 3:40 a.m. when I finally closed the archive. Outside, Columbus was silent and black, streetlights casting pale pools onto empty pavement. Somewhere a dog barked once and then stopped. The world didn't look different, but I did. Once your mind accepts a truth like this, it rearranges everything that came before it. Mira had spent months crafting an illusion. Victor had been counting my money before he'd even touched it. And I'd been living inside their story without knowing I was a character. I shut the laptop gently, as if noise could wake the version of me that still believed in normal mornings. Upstairs, Mira slept, or pretended to, with the ease of someone who thought she'd erased her tracks. She hadn't, and for the first time since midnight, I felt something besides shock. Clarity. My birthday was over, sure, but the real lesson of turning 30 was sitting right in front of me, cold and undeniable. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a plan, and now that I knew the shape of it, I had to decide what kind of man I was going to be when I answered it. Morning arrived like a stage reset. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee cooling in my hands, watching a thin stripe of sun creep across reports I no longer cared about. Upstairs, Mira's hair dryer started around 7. Drawers opened, hangers shifted, heels tapped. She didn't come down. No sleepy smile, no question about my early wake-up, no mention of my birthday. At 7:45, her BMW backed out of the garage and vanished down her street. I checked Find My. Her drifted toward downtown, right on schedule for another client emergency. What I'd learned overnight was simple. Mira didn't improvise lies. She engineered them. My phone rang while I was rinsing the mug. Derek Langley, my old partner from Columbus PD, the man who could hear trouble through static. "Happy birthday, Fossil," he said. "How's 30 treating you?" Like I woke up in someone else's life. A beat of silence. You okay? No. Lunch. Murphy's at noon. Yeah. Done. And Miles, don't do anything rash before we talk. I spent the morning pulling threads. Mira's laptop was still signed into our shared accounts. She'd never changed the passwords I built for her years ago because people don't imagine their spouse as a risk factor. I opened her email and rolled back 6 months. What I found wasn't one sloppy cover story. It was a system, fake conference registrations, calendar invites with invented clients, and long chains with coworkers about meetings that never happened. She had been planting alibis in advance. Then I found Nadia Lemieux. Nadia wasn't just a friend. She was Mira's shield. Their messages were blunt in a way friends rarely are when they think no one else will read them. Nadia forwarded screenshots of my trust paperwork, notes about my usual routines, and guesses about how I might react if I sensed anything. They talked about my schedule like it was a lock they needed to pick. The tone wasn't gossip. It was planning. By late morning, my shock had cooled into procedure. I copied what mattered into a separate folder and secured it. Murphy's Pub felt like old work boots, worn in and dependable. Dark booths, fryer smell, cops who still scanned rooms out of habit. Derek was already there, broad shoulders, gray at the temples, the same stubborn face I'd trusted for years. You look wrecked, he said. Close enough. He ordered a burger. I ordered coffee. Then I gave him the timeline without drama. My forgotten birthday, the hotel at the Grand Meridian, Victor Reigns' Maserati next to Mira's BMW, the cake to room 304, their panicked exit, the cloud backups, the affair starting in October, and the text about steering my grandmother's trust fund into Victor's investments. I told him Nadia was in on it. Derek's expression darkened. When I finished, he leaned back. So what's your play? I could file for divorce tomorrow, I said. But this was months of calculation. They talked about my inheritance like it was already theirs. A clean split feels like letting them walk away untouched. He nodded. You want the full truth on the table, not just an ending. Exactly. He slid a card across the table. Renee Red Sanchez, retired Cincinnati PD, private investigator now. She's precise. Photos, timestamps, patterns. I picked it up. Be careful, Derek added. I've seen good men lose themselves chasing payback. Don't let this turn you into someone you don't recognize. I hear you. After lunch, I sat in my Civic for a minute before calling. Red answer on the third ring, voice rough and direct. Derek says you need surveillance. How detailed? Everything. Where they go, who they meet, how often. Photos and video if possible. That's expensive. Money isn't a problem. Pause. When do we start? Tonight. All right. I'll send updates. Keep your hands clean, Miles. Let evidence do the heavy lifting. At 2, Mira texted, working late on a presentation. Don't wait up. Another lie to stack on the pile. Around 6, my phone buzzed from Red. A photo, Mira entering Victor Reigns' building downtown. Another, the two of them close together in the lobby, relaxed, familiar. The timestamps were sharp. Mira came home at 10:30 with her usual performance of exhaustion. She dropped beside me, asked about my day, and leaned into my shoulder. I caught a trace of cologne that wasn't mine. I'm sorry I've been so busy, she said. After this project, we should take a trip. Napa, maybe. I kept my voice steady. That sounds great. We should plan it. She kissed my cheek and went upstairs to shower, humming like a person whose world was still intact. I waited for the door to close, then checked Red's feed. More photos, dinner, a walk through the courtyard, them disappearing into his building again. Nothing I needed to look away from, just a clear, relentless pattern. The evidence was no longer about catching her. It was about understanding how wide the circle went. If Mira and Victor built a scheme this carefully, they didn't do it alone. Nadia was proof. Others would surface. Upstairs, the shower stopped. Mira moved around, thinking the night had reset. Downstairs, I saved each file, labeled it by date, and watched the case solidify. I wasn't chasing a scene anymore. I was building the map for whatever came next, and I felt ready. By Friday afternoon, I understood their rhythm. Deceptions turn into habits, and habits leave tracks. Mira kept saying she was buried in client work. Each morning had a new emergency. Each night a new reason to stay downtown. Red's timestamps showed the real schedule. Victor Raines's penthouse was the hub, and Friday nights were their dependable routine. I didn't confront her. I wanted to see who they became under pressure. That evening, Mira came into the kitchen already half changed, too polished for late office revisions. "Client emergency," she said, fixing an earring in the microwave's reflection. "Could be midnight." I nodded. She waited for a fight, didn't get one, kissed my cheek, and left. When her BMW vanished down the street, I drove downtown. Victor's silver Maserati sat in its reserved spot outside his building, gleaming like a badge. He posted that car everywhere. To him, it wasn't transport, it was identity. The windows were cracked slightly. Perfect. I poured rancid fishing bait through the gap. Then fermented shrimp paced across the dash. The odor was instant, thick and sour. I painted home wrecker in bright pink across the hood, then smeared industrial adhesive on the door handles. Annoying, humiliating, and expensive to fix. 10 minutes later, I was gone. At 11:30 p.m., my phone buzzed from an unknown number. "What did you do to my car?" I deleted it without replying. Mira came home at 12:45, looking rattled. Her face was pale, her eyes glued to her phone. "Meeting ended early," she said, thin-voiced. I asked if she was okay. "Just tired." She skipped her goodnight kiss and went upstairs. I heard her pacing and whispering into the phone for nearly an hour. Saturday morning, her phone rang before 8. She answered fast and stepped onto the patio. Through the glass, I watched her pace, hands in her hair. When she returned, she looked drained. "Errands," she said. "Returns and groceries. I'll be out a while." She left without looking at me. I called Red. "They went to a car wash," she reported. "Tried pressure washing, chemicals, everything. The smell isn't coming out. Paint's still there." He's shaken. "Good. This makes them more careful," she warned. "Scared people make mistakes. Pressure isn't one punch. It's a squeeze." That afternoon, I moved to phase 2. Mira's firm lived on perception. Polished posts, cheerful testimonials, the image of steadiness. Her personal accounts were just as curated. She sold reputation for a living, so reputation was her soft underbelly. I made anonymous accounts and left questions on her business page. Nothing that screamed sabotage. Has anyone else had trouble reaching Mira lately? Heard some ethical concerns around a recent partnership. Can you clarify? Are you expanding into investment consulting? Seems like a conflict. Different voices, different times, different connections. The goal wasn't to burn her down overnight. It was to plant small doubts that would grow. By Sunday night, it showed. Mira barely ate dinner, flinching at every notification. "Someone's targeting my business," she said. "Clients are asking things. Maybe a competitor." "That's awful," I said. "What will you do?" She shook her head. "What can I do? Report mean comments." "Maybe hire a private investigator," I suggested like it was her idea. Her fork froze midair. She studied my face too long, then looked away. "I'll think about it." She slept badly that night, turning beside me. She was trapped between keeping Victor and protecting her public life. Truth would have solved both, but she wasn't choosing it. Monday morning, Red confirmed another downtown hotel meeting. While they tried to plan their escape, I widened pressure on Victor. His firm's website was glossy and loud, full of perfect testimonials. Public records told a rougher story. Clients who'd lost money, claims dressed for marketing. Not a clear crime, but enough for unpleasant questions. I compiled a short report and sent it anonymously to local financial journalists and consumer watchdogs. I didn't need a collapse, just scrutiny. Monday night, she came home earlier than usual, carrying takeout and a practiced smile. "Long day," she said, leaning into the doorway, as if she could hold the house together by acting normal. I thanked her, ate in silence, and watched her hands tremble when she scrolled her phone. She wasn't trembling for me. She was trembling for the story she was losing control of. Red texted late. He spooked, driving different routes, checking over his shoulder. That was what I wanted. A man watching for shadows stops thinking clearly. I could feel the net tightening, not with rage, but with still patience I'd learned on the job. Every new lie Mira told was another knot she tied around her own future. And I wasn't done pulling the rope yet. By Tuesday afternoon, it was working. Mira came home exhausted. Clients called about rumors, she said. My biggest account might walk. Someone wants due diligence on our partners. Background checks. Financials. It feels like we're under investigation. I nodded sympathetically. Maybe a cautious client. She didn't buy it. The hunted look was back. For a second, I thought she might confess. Instead, she forced a smile. Be patient with me. Things will get better soon. Another lie. And when people keep choosing lies under pressure, they walk deeper into the tunnel. The deeper they go, the harder they fall when the lights turn on. Wednesday morning, I woke to an empty house. No note, no text, just a cold coffee cup in the sink and a faint trail of Mira's perfume lingering in the hallway like a fingerprint she didn't know she'd left behind. Her car was gone. I opened Find My. Her that was already downtown, parked at Victor Raines's building. It was barely 7. Red had warned me that pressure makes people sloppy. I was watching it happen in real time. Mira wasn't even pretending to space things out anymore. Either she'd spent the night there, or she'd rushed over before daylight had fully arrived. Either way, the boldness told me the same thing. She was desperate, and desperate people trade caution for comfort. I called Red. How long has she been there? Since last evening, she said. She never left. I felt something simple and solid settle in my chest. Not surprise, not pain, just the last click of a lock turning. Get everything today, I said. Photos, video, timestamps. No gaps. You planning something big? The biggest. After we hung up, I sat in my office chair and stared at the wall for a minute, letting the plan line up in my head the way cases used to. When you're investigating a stranger, the goal is truth. When you're investigating your spouse, truth is only step 1. The real question is what you do with it. I wasn't interested in a quiet ending anymore. Mira and Victor hadn't kept this private. They dragged Nadia into it, used my routines, discussed my inheritance like a prize. That wasn't a lapse in judgment. That was a campaign. If they wanted to turn my marriage into a scheme, they were going to face the consequences in daylight. First, I called my Aunt Lorna. She'd raised me after my parents died, ran a pawn shop on the rougher edge of town, and had a moral compass that snapped to true north the moment someone tried to play her family. About time you saw who she is, Lorna said after I told her the short version. No shock, no hesitation. I never trusted her smile. I need people to know the truth, I said. Send me what you have. I emailed her the worst of the messages and Red's clearest photos. Lorna had a network built over decades of helping people and listening to them. By noon, half the city's informal grapevine would be humming with Mira's name. Some people weaponized gossip for sport. Lorna used it for justice. Next, I called Nadia. I didn't text. I wanted her voice. She answered on the second ring, bright and automatic. Oh, hi, Miles. Everything okay? I'll let a beat hang. Mira didn't come home last night, I said. She said she was having dinner with you. Silence. Nadia? Yes. Sorry. We had plans, but she canceled last minute. Work emergency. I assumed she told you. She told me she was meeting you. More silence. I could hear Nadia recalculating, trying to figure out which lie to support without knowing how much I already knew. Maybe there was a mix-up, she said finally. You know how busy she's been. Right, I said. If you hear from her, tell her I'm worried. I hung up before she could find another line. Within minutes, she'd be calling Mira in a panic. The pressure would tighten from another direction, and I'd have a clean timestamp showing Nadia lied, too. At 3 p.m., Red sent a video. Mira and Victor leaving his building together, getting into a rental car, driving across town to a restaurant. They looked relaxed, almost cheerful, like people who believe they'd contain the damage. Victor didn't look cheerful. He looked haunted, unshaven, sunglasses even inside, his head turned too often toward reflections in windows. The Maserati stunt had dug under his skin deeper than I expected. Fear was turning him into a different man, and different men make different mistakes. That gave me my opening. Victor's investment group was hosting a networking event Thursday evening at the Grand Meridian, the same hotel where I'd found Mira the first night. Registration was open online. I signed up under a fake name claiming I ran a tech startup seeking funding. The system approved me automatically. Thursday, I arrived early, sat in the lobby bar with a clear view of the event space, and waited. Red stayed outside to monitor parking. Derek agreed to be on call if things got messy. Victor walked in at 6:30, scanning the room like he expected a trap. Mira wasn't with him. She'd texted me earlier, working late again. Another lie to frame the hour. The event was exactly what I expected. 40 people in expensive suits pretending not to measure each other. Victor worked the room with professional charm, but his eyes kept slipping to the doors, to his phone, to shadows. At 7:15 I approached when he was briefly alone. Victor Rains? I'm Daniel Mercer from Apex Technologies. We sent an investment proposal last month. His smile flicked on, strained at the edges. Of course. Good to meet you. I wanted to ask about due diligence, I said. Background checks, compliance records, that kind of thing. Our investors are cautious. There have been questions around your firm lately. His face tightened. Questions? Nothing proven, I said lightly. Just rumors. Client complaints, a bit of regulatory interest. And you know how a small market is, personal relationships get talked about. Mixing business with private life. People get nervous. The color drained from his face. I handed him a card with a fake number. Call me if you want to reassure our board, I said. Then I walked away. Red texted a minute later. He's agitated. Just called someone. Mira, I thought. He was warning her that pressure was becoming visible in public. That would push them toward faster, riskier decisions. I went home. Mira arrived 10 minutes after I did. The same frazzled act, the same soft reality distortion. How was work? I asked. Exhausting, she said. This project is eating me alive. How much longer? Soon. Maybe next week. That's what you said last week. She froze mid-step. Are you accusing me of something? There it was. The defensive pivot. The attempt to make my tone the crime instead of her actions. I held her eyes a second. This was another chance for her to step out of the maze. Instead, she raised her voice about pressure, about me not supporting her, about how hard she was working. She chose the story again, and that told me it was time. Friday morning, I made the call I'd been holding back. First to Columbus Business First. I gave the journalist a tight, documented package. Public discrepancies in Victor's marketing, the conflict of interest with Mira, and evidence of a relationship tangled in side client work. She didn't promise a headline, but her questions sharpened as I spoke. She said she'd call Victor for comment that afternoon. Next, I reached out to Mira's 3 biggest clients. Not with accusations, just casual due diligence questions about their satisfaction and whether they'd noticed instability at her firm. I planted concerns the way I'd planted online doubt, gently, plausibly, enough to make them revisit their contracts. Then came the final email. At 2:17 p.m., I sent an anonymous message to everyone in Mira's contact list. Friends, family, coworkers, clients. No insults, no dramatics, just the truth and the evidence, photos, screenshots, and a timeline of every lie used to cover the affair and the money plan. I turned off my phone and waited. At 3:30, I heard her BMW screech up the street. She burst through the front door like a storm, face flushed, hands shaking, phone waving in the air. What did you do? She shouted. I looked up from my laptop with calm I'd practiced all week. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb. The email, the photos. Everyone's calling me. My mother's crying. My boss wants to see me Monday. Clients are canceling. Maybe you should sit down and tell me what's going on. She stared at me, chest heaving, searching for a way to bend reality back into her shape. Even now, she tried to minimize. Someone sent out private information, she said. Personal stuff taken out of context. What kind of stuff? I asked. She hesitated, then handed me her phone. I scrolled through my own email as if it were news. This looks like you've been having an affair with Victor for 6 months, I said quietly, while lying to me about work. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. It's complicated, she whispered. Complicated how? The part where you cheated? Or the part where you and Victor talked about my trust fund? Her face emptied. The last pieces of color drained away. You read my messages? All of them. She collapsed onto the couch and started crying, ugly and exhausted. I felt nothing. Not cruelty, not pleasure, just distance. She wasn't the person I married. She was someone who wore that person's face. I never meant for it to go this far, she said. It just happened. And the money? I asked. The plan to push my inheritance into his investments without telling me. She flinched like I'd struck her. We were going to pay you back. It was an investment, without my permission, while lying to me every day. Silence. I stood up. Pack your things and leave. This is my house, too. It isn't. The deed's in my name. Bought before we married. With trust money. You have no claim to it. She shot to her feet, anger replacing tears. You think you're so clever. But you're nothing without me. Maybe, I said. But I'm not the one who betrayed everyone who trusted her. She stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to shake the windows. I watched her sit in the car for several minutes, probably calling Victor or Nadia or a lawyer. Then she drove away, and the street went quiet again. A minute later, my phone lit up with a text from Derek. Saw the blowback. You okay? I typed back, better than I've been in months. Because it was true. The game was over. Not because I won some battle of pride, but because the truth was finally where it belonged, out in the open, where it could do its work. I opened a beer, sat alone in the living room, and felt the strange relief that comes after a case closes. Outside, Columbus kept moving like any other Friday evening. Inside, the lies were finished. And for the first time since my birthday, I could breathe like myself again. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened. Take care.